สนับสนุนโดยพลังของทุกคนร่วมก่อเกิดเป็น AIA เราคือพลังสร้างอนาคตเมื่อทุกรายละเอียดสร้างมาเพื่อการตอบสนอง Chevrolet Cruise Engineer to Respond ใหม่ Isuzu D-Max Super Titanium น้ำดื่มสะอาดน้ำดื่มตราสิงห์
What's the results?
The results, okay. We have the global results for this year. We have a winning trio, as we call it, because it's the first time we've had such a close statistical result for any countries, and that's we call it often a neck-to-neck race. We have Singapore number one, and the United States and Hong Kong.
Not that surprising, is it?
It's very surprising because it's the first time that the United States has lost its first position. After 14 years.
And to a small country like Singapore.
And to a very small country, but yet Singapore is probably one of the most competitive across all of the factors of competitiveness. Of course, obviously does not have the size or the geopolitical power of the United States, but what we're concerned with is the creation of wealth within an economy. And there's a lot more wealth that is being created and distributed to the population in Singapore right now than there is in the United States, where in fact there's a lot of talk about losing the competitiveness potential in the United States. And
maybe it's because of the crisis they had a couple
It's also
of years
because
back.
of the crisis, but it goes even further back. What we've seen is the gap, if you like, between some of these smaller, very competitive nations like Singapore, Hong Kong, and the Scandinavian countries. The gap between the United States is closing. And it's been closing more and more over the years until finally this year we really do have the United States being pushed down, down to third position. So you've got Singapore, Hong Kong, and the United States. And you have Thailand in 26th position. So it's the same as it is last year. Well, some people would say, given all the circumstances that Thailand had to deal with this year,
it's good enough we maintain our ranking.
Exactly, it's good enough. We're happy that we didn't decline. But you have to put that into perspective. Because on the other hand, all of the other ASEAN nations, in fact, progressed in the ranking. I would say, be careful of not accepting the status quo. Do not become complacent and say, we're just lucky that we didn't fall in the rankings. Because this is a unique opportunity in the world today, where you have the Asian region is actually the locomotive of growth in the world economy. And it probably will save the world economy from maybe falling into another global recession. This is a wonderful and unique opportunity. The economic balance of power is actually shifting from the West to the East. More companies from the West are moving to the East to take advantage of the new middle class, of the large domestic economies, of the emerging markets. And it would be very unfortunate if Thailand was left behind.
But that's largely because of China, right?
Well, yes, but you also have newly emerging economies like Vietnam, that is pretty much competing for a lot of the same investment as some of the other Asian economies. You have Philippines that is struggling as well, and then you have Malaysia and Korea that have put competitiveness really at the top of their agenda. And are focusing on pulling together a competitiveness strategy that will really move their activities into higher value-added activities, more creative industries. And I think these are good examples, these are good role models for Thailand. Whether it wants to go more in a degree of openness like Malaysia, or whether it will go more in the direction of Korea, which tends to be more of a closed environment to competitiveness. My own feeling is we would like to see it move more into a degree of greater openness.
Openness in what sense?
Openness in the sense of being open to new and foreign ideas, having positive attitudes towards globalization, not being fearful of the future, saying we do not need to close our borders. We do not need to become protectionist.
I thought we're pretty open in every way.
Exactly, and that is it's a competitive advantage that needs to be capitalized on. Thailand in the past has historically been a very open economy, but on the other hand, it's not attracting very much foreign direct investment. And the question is, how do you create an environment that differentiates Thailand's attractiveness from the other economies. A company that wants to come to Asia, it has a huge spectrum to choose from.
Right.
Is it only going to be attracted by the very low-cost environment of Thailand? I would think the government would like to strive for something a little bit more ambitious. The geography, Thailand has one of the most advantageous locations in Southeast Asia as well, much more advantageous than Singapore. So you develop your infrastructure to accommodate that foreign investment. You work on the skills of the local population to meet the needs of the business community. Then you also bring in what is what you cannot promote within the country. So you harness the technology from abroad. You bring in best practices from abroad. But you also make sure that when you join in in a venture with a foreign company, that they're not there just to exploit the country. You want to make sure that Thailand is getting the maximum out of that.
Which areas should Thailand focus on most, according to the data?
To our data, I would say the competitive weaknesses that have the largest scope for improvement would be to focus on the technological readiness. I would say also there's room for improvement in science and research and development. There is a very low level of expenditure on research and development. I would say maybe more creative activities, looking to differentiate Thailand's competitive advantages from the others. There's a huge potential to do more in the tourism sector, but do tourism differently from the other regional countries as well. Malaysia and Korea are putting a lot of emphasis now on niche tourism, on wellness programs. So the combination of looking at the beautiful landscape, the beautiful natural endowments that Thailand has, not moving towards mass tourism, moving into more niche tourism, maybe concentrating on wellness programs, on even cultural tourism. This is something that's doing very well in Europe right now. And also, I would say there's probably a very good potential for Thailand to be a world leader in food, in agribusiness, but also in green technologies, I would say in alternative energies as well. You have a lot of competencies in those areas.
Out of all the data for the 58 countries, what is the interesting pattern or finding? Do you see one?
Yes, we have, especially with the financial crisis. Now that we're coming out of it, we're seeing signs of recovery. We're seeing more and more the large emerging economies moving up in the rankings. So you have the BRIC nations of Brazil, Russia, India, and China. If we look at just those four, we're seeing a very large discrepancy in their competitiveness performance. We have China moving up basically due to its very strong and dynamic economic performance. And on the other hand, it's being not dragged down, but it's being prevented from moving up higher because of lagging criteria in the social and economic factors. Problems with legislation, problems with health and environment. And at the same time, we're seeing in Latin America and Brazil is performing very, very well, a highly diversified economy, attracting a lot of investment, but also now doing a lot of outbound investment. On the other hand, we have Russia that is stagnating, not moving up in competitiveness at all, being very much regressing in some ways in competitiveness, even though they're able to still attract a lot of investment because of natural resources. They're very highly dependent on the exploitation of their natural resources alone and not sufficiently diversifying into their manufacturing and services. And then you have India that is now also moving alongside China, sometimes diverting, sometimes converging, and the two, in fact, nations have a lot to learn from each other. So whereas China has been driven by exports and by investment, India has been driven by its domestic demand. There needs to be now more of a changeover. So you have India now that needs to move more into establishing a very strong manufacturing base, attracting more investment and exporting more to the global economy, following China's example, where China also now needs to be less dependent on exports and investment and to be focusing more on driving growth from its domestic economies.
How big is corruption an obstacle to competitiveness of a country?
It is overall. It's a major break to the further achieving a high potential of competitiveness. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, it's a very long-term process to change mentalities. So you say you really have to start working at just striving to push the message through at a very, very strong level with anti-corruption committees, with awarding prizes to companies that are striving to make large improvements in governance, and also to publicize very much the activity that the government is undertaking as far as recognizing the grassroots struggle or the bottom-up approach that companies are taking to eradicating corruption. I think it's more difficult for the government to actually impose that on companies. It has to be driven by the companies themselves.
And the competitiveness of a country would definitely translate into the well-being of the population,
yes,
right?
Yes, definitely.
There's a strong correlation there.
Of course, yes. The consequences of competitiveness should be that the wealth generated from the growing of an economy should be then distributed among the population. So this can be in the tangible form of infrastructure, roads, hospitals, schools, training programs for the unemployed, giving back to society. And this is one of the problems we see sometimes in competitiveness, is that it's just the wealth of society is remaining in certain groups,
small
vested interests, exactly, and pieces of the pie that are staying very narrow. The idea with competitiveness is to take the pie that exists and make it larger, so that everybody's piece of the pie is then, of course, expanded as well. So the whole goal of competitiveness is it's not a goal in itself; it's a means to an end. And that ultimate objective of competitiveness is to raise the living standards of the population.